Shirley Muldowney's story doesn't begin on a racetrack. It begins on the cracked streets of Schenectady, New York, where a young girl watched hot rods scream past her neighborhood and felt something she wasn't supposed to feel: envy. Back then, drag racing wasn't just a man's sport, it was a man's world. A world where women were allowed to watch, maybe cheer, but never touch the wheel. And yet, even as a teenager, Shirley wasn't interested in rules. She was interested in speed, real speed. The kind that made the ground vibrate, the kind that made your heartbeat match the engine's pulse, the kind that made men turn their heads without realizing they were looking at the future. She started at the bottom, illegal street racing, wrenching on cars with her husband Jack, sneaking into garages where men would stop talking the second she walked in. Most women would have backed out of that room. Shirley didn't. She learned the sound of an engine the way a musician learns the sound of a violin. She memorized every bolt, every gasket, every trick the boys didn't want her to know. And when she finally sat behind the wheel of a real dragster, she didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She hit the throttle and proved something instantly. She wasn't there to participate. She was there to dominate. But word travels fast in racing, and when word spread that a woman was beating the men on their own streets, egos began to crack. Men who had never lost suddenly found their pride on life support. And still, Shirley kept winning. She moved from street strips to local tracks, from local tracks to regional circuits. And each time she climbed into a faster machine, every weekend became a war zone, where she showed up in a pink car, in a pink jacket, with a look that said, "Underestimate me, I dare you." And they did again, and again, and again. But the bigger Shirley got, the bigger the walls became. The NHRA didn't just refuse to welcome her, they tried to block her entirely. They had unspoken rules, old traditions, and whispered beliefs disguised as policy. No woman had ever been licensed to drive a top-fuel dragster. No woman had ever been allowed to sit behind one of the most violent, dangerous machines on Earth. And when Shirley applied for the license, the committees didn't just say no, they laughed. They dismissed her. They told her to stay in the slower classes, stay in the background, stay small. But Shirley Muldowney wasn't built to stay small. So she did what only the great ones do. She refused to accept the script she was handed. She hunted down signatures from the very drivers she had beaten for years. Drivers who respected her talent even when the sanctioning bodies didn't. One by one, they signed her license form, knowing that giving Shirley a top fuel machine wasn't just risky, it was historic. She pushed through the paperwork, the hearings, the politics, and the insults until NHRA finally caved. In 1973, she became the first woman in history to earn a top fuel license. And the moment she strapped into that long, violent, nitromethane-burning monster, everything changed. Top fuel wasn't the cars she grew up with. These were rockets, explosive, unforgiving, deadly, the kind of machines that killed seasoned men in seconds. But Shirley wasn't afraid. She was hungry. She hit the throttle for the first time, and the dragster didn't just launch, it erupted forward with a brutality that tried to tear her vision apart. And yet she drove it like she was born inside it. Smooth hands, perfect instincts, no hesitation. The crew members watching from the starting line didn't know what to say. They had expected a woman experimenting with power she couldn't handle. What they got was a predator unleashed. And in that moment, everyone on that track realized the truth. Shirley Muldowney wasn't here to break into drag racing. She was here to break it open. Shirley Muldowney didn't just enter top fuel, she detonated inside it. And the moment she did, the men who built their careers, reputations, and egos around horsepower felt the ground shift beneath them. Drag racing wasn't just a competition in those days. It was a brotherhood, a tight, closed, unbreakable circle. And Shirley, with her pink cars and sharper-than-steel confidence, wasn't just knocking on the door, she was kicking it off the hinges. The tension didn't start on the racetrack. It started in the pits, where the culture was tighter and more territorial than anywhere else. Mechanics paused their work when she walked by. Conversations dropped. Wrenches stopped clinking. Some looked at her with curiosity. others with confusion, but most with the same look men get when they think something sacred is being threatened. Drivers whispered. Crew chiefs shook their heads. The old-timers didn't hide their contempt. They had built this sport with their hands, their sweat, their busted knuckles, and they didn't want a woman rewriting its history. And yet Shirley kept showing up, helmet in hand, eyes forward, ready to run. The men didn't understand her. They thought she was a novelty act, a media distraction, a dare gone too far. What they didn't realize was that Shirley never came to entertain. She came to conquer. And when she started running times that matched the men who'd spent decades mastering the craft, the fear began. Fear disguised as sarcasm. Fear disguised as rules. Fear disguised as jokes. Jokes that weren't jokes at all. Some drivers refused to line up next to her. Others said racing a woman made them look weak. A few tried to intimidate her at the starting line, revving their engines like angry animals, as if noise could shake the focus of a woman who had already fought harder battles than any of them. But nothing rattled her. The louder they were, the quieter she became. The more they pushed, the harder she locked in. Shirley didn't fight back with trash talk or theatrics. She fought with time slips. And time slips never lie. But the resistance wasn't just verbal. NHRA officials began inspecting her car more aggressively than anyone else's. Some even admitted it later. They were trying to find a way to slow her down, to discredit her, to keep the sport safe. Safe meaning male. Safe meaning unchallenged. Safe meaning unchanged. One official went so far as to say, "We don't want to see a woman die out here." Shirley's reply was a knife disguised as a sentence. Men die out here all the time. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She simply refused to accept the idea that danger belonged only to men. And every time she fired up her engine, she proved she knew how to dance with danger better than the men trying to protect their territory. Fans were divided. Some adored her, the young girls, the mothers, the families who saw in her something they'd never seen on a racetrack. Others booed, loudly, violently. Some held signs telling her to go home. Some yelled at her during staging. A few even told her she didn't belong in the sport she was already outrunning. But the thing about legends is simple. Legends are carved from resistance. And every ounce of resistance pushed Shirley deeper into the craft. She spent hours after races tuning her engine with her crew, often longer than the men who criticized her. She practiced reaction times until her fingers twitched with instinct. She studied track conditions like a scientist. She absorbed every failure like fuel. She sharpened every victory like a blade. And slowly, painfully, relentlessly, she built something no rulebook, no official, and no angry driver could take away from her. Respect. Not the kind handed out, not the kind politely granted, the kind earned through fire and steel. And the men who tried to stop her, they weren't just facing Shirley anymore. They were facing the future. When Shirley Muldowney decided she wanted to race Top Fuel, the fastest, most violent, most unforgiving class in drag racing, she didn't just face resistance. She faced a wall built from tradition, fear, ego, and a governing body terrified that giving a woman 3,000 horsepower was an invitation for disaster. The NHRA wasn't subtle about it either. They didn't want her in Top Fuel. Not in a year. Not ever. Getting licensed wasn't like today. There were no online forms, no streamlined process. You didn't just apply. You had to prove yourself publicly, brutally, undeniably. And the only way to do that was to get signatures from established Top Fuel drivers who would vouch for your skill and your safety. Without those signatures, you were dead in the water. And Shirley needed 3. Most drivers didn't even let her finish her sentence. No chance, not happening. Some laughed, some lectured. Some said, "You're gonna get yourself killed, sweetheart." But none of them understood the truth, not yet. Shirley wasn't looking for permission. She was hunting for names on a paper that would eventually rewrite motorsports history. The first person who even considered signing her form didn't do it because he believed in gender equality. He did it because he saw something in her eyes, a dangerous mix of intelligence, obsession, and stubbornness that reminded him of the best racers he'd ever known. He watched her stage a car. He watched her focus. He watched how she handled danger. And he knew what most men refused to admit. She was the real deal. But one signature wasn't enough. So Shirley kept moving from pit to pit, race to race, man to man, facing the same wall over and over again. Some men were cruel, others were afraid. A few simply didn't want to be the one who let a woman into their sacred arena, and yet she didn't break. Every rejection was gasoline on her fire. Then came someone she didn't expect, Big Daddy Don Garlits, the king of drag racing, the man whose name alone shifted crowds. Shirley had always admired him not as a celebrity, but as an engineer, a perfectionist, a master of the craft. She respected the way he treated racing like physics and art at the same time. And Garlits had been watching her too, watching her cut perfect lights, watching her handle power like she was born for it, watching her tune her own equipment with a level of precision most drivers never learned. When Garlits signed her licensing paper, the sport felt the tremor. 2 signatures down, 1 left. This time the problem wasn't rejection, it was sabotage. Drivers who had previously said maybe now said absolutely not. Word spread that Garlits had signed. Opinions hardened. Men doubled down. Suddenly, refusing to sign wasn't about safety, it was about taking a stand against change. Rumors started. Lies followed. Some said she was reckless. Some said she pushed her equipment too hard. A few even claimed she didn't understand engines, which was laughable to anyone who had ever watched her working barehanded beside her team. But the more they pushed, the more fate pulled. Her 3rd signature came from a man who wasn't afraid of the sport evolving, a man who simply judged Shirley for one thing: can she drive? He watched her run, smooth launch, clean pass, straight line, no panic, no drift. The kind of run that made other drivers nod quietly, even if they'd never admit it out loud. He signed, and with that signature, the NHRA was out of excuses. They didn't want her, they didn't believe in her, they didn't trust her, but they couldn't deny her. Shirley Muldowney was now a licensed top fuel driver. It didn't matter that nearly the entire establishment fought against it. It didn't matter that she earned her license with more resistance than any driver before her. What mattered is that she stepped into a class built by men, built for men, built to exclude women, and she walked in like she already owned the place. And deep down, the men who tried to stop her knew exactly what was coming next. She wasn't just licensed, she was unleashed. When Shirley Muldowney rolled her freshly licensed top fuel dragster to the starting line for the first time, nobody in the grandstands cared about her credentials, her signatures, her fight, or her persistence. They were only there for one thing: to watch her fail. Because the truth is that a large percentage of the old school crowd didn't believe she could even stage the car correctly, let alone launch it, control it, and survive the quarter mile, strapped into a machine powerful enough to tear a weaker driver apart from the inside out. And as she sat there, tightening her belts with mechanical precision, the grandstands buzzed with whispers, jokes, predictions of disaster, and the kind of cruel, mocking confidence only ignorance can produce. But what none of them understood not yet was that Shirley was operating on a level of focus that most racers never even reach. A tunnel vision mindset she had built over years of being doubted, pushed aside, underestimated, and told she didn't belong. And that mindset created something dangerous. She wasn't scared of the car. She was ready to command it. Officials looked uneasy. Crew chiefs nearby watched with crossed arms. Some drivers stared with open disdain. And yet, the track felt different. The energy shifted. Even the air seemed to hold still as she rolled into the burnout box. Shirley snapped the throttle, and that's when the first shockwave hit the crowd. Her burnout wasn't sloppy or panicked like they expected. It wasn't cautious or timid. It was violent, controlled, precise, exactly what a top fuel burnout needed to be. The rear tires liquefied rubber against the asphalt. The engine thundered like artillery, and the car shot a plume of smoke so clean and authoritative that even seasoned racers were forced into silence. Then she backed up straight, perfectly straight. No fumbling, no corrections, no hesitation, just cold, methodical focus. People in the stands exchanged looks because suddenly the narrative they believed for years that women didn't belong, that she wasn't strong enough, smart enough, fast enough, started to crack. And cracks like that only get bigger. She pre-staged, then staged, and for a split second, the entire world seemed to inhale. The tree dropped, and Shirley Muldowney launched so hard that the front tires drifted into the air, the car ripping down the track like it had been waiting decades for someone exactly like her to tame it. And every foot of that pass was a punch to the chest of every doubter, every critic, every man who told her she was chasing something impossible, because her car didn't wander, it didn't fishtail, it didn't lose control, it ran straight and deadly, the kind of run only the most disciplined drivers can pull off under pressure. By half-track, the crowd wasn't laughing anymore. By three-quarter track, they were leaning forward. And when she blasted through the traps with a time faster than half the field of established male veterans, the entire drag strip went silent. Not a respectful silence, not a polite silence, but the kind of stunned silence that happens when a truth reveals itself so clearly, so brutally, that nobody can deny it. She popped the chutes, the dragster slowed, the engine ticked hot metal sounds, and she coasted to a stop like a woman who already knew what she had done. Back at the starting line, the mood had changed. Crew chiefs who dismissed her now whispered to each other with tight jaws. Drivers who refused to sign her license stared at the scoreboard in disbelief. Officials looked like they'd swallowed their own rule book, because they all understood what that run meant. Shirley wasn't a novelty. She wasn't a stunt. She wasn't a political statement. She was a force, a real racer. A top-fuel dragster pilot who didn't crack under pressure, she created pressure. And as she climbed out of her car, pulling off her helmet with the same calm confidence she had before the run, something incredible happened. A few fans in the stand stood up, then a few more, then a wave. And within seconds, the same crowd that came to watch her fail was applauding. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. It wasn't respect, she'd still have to earn that again and again. But it was something far more important in that moment. They knew she belonged. And nothing terrified her enemies more than that. The morning after Shirley's first real top-fuel pass, the drag racing world split cleanly down the middle, not in silence, not in grudging acceptance, but in a loud, messy, public war that caught fire faster than nitro in the sun. Because while a small but growing group of fans finally acknowledged they had witnessed something extraordinary, the old guard of the sport, the drivers who believed drag racing should stay a men-only battlefield, the crew chiefs who resented anyone disrupting tradition, the officials who had quietly hoped she would fail, were blindsided by the reality that she wasn't just good, she was dangerous. Because if a woman could show up and outrun veterans on her first legitimate weekend, it threatened the very mythology they had used to justify keeping her out. And nothing fuels anger faster than fear. Whispers started in the pits. She got lucky. Her run was a fluke. Someone must have slipped her illegal parts. Her team must be bending the rules. She couldn't possibly have the reaction time she posted. She didn't really control the car. The wind was in her favor. Every excuse, every desperate reach, anything to avoid saying the truth, she flat out deserved to be there. Mechanics made sure she heard the muttering. Drivers made sure she saw the glares. And NHRA officials made sure she felt the weight of their scrutiny, because overnight, she went from being dismissed to being investigated. Every nut, bolt, timing curve, clutch setting, and fuel flow examined with a microscope they rarely used on male drivers who had been caught cheating more times than anyone could count. But Shirley wasn't intimidated. If anything, she became sharper. The more they doubted her, the more she doubled down. She arrived earlier than every other driver, left later, studied track temperatures, watched clutch dust, learned fuel percentages, memorized every inch of her car until it was an extension of herself. And something the men didn't expect began to happen. Fear morphed into frustration. Frustration morphed into anger, and anger morphed into open hostility. Some drivers refused to line up against her. Others threatened to protest every run she made. One even told a reporter that the only reason she was fast was because she didn't weigh enough to be in the seat. And yet, behind every attack, every insult, every attempt to block her from racing, there was a truth that none of them wanted to face. She wasn't breaking drag racing, she was exposing it. She was showing the world that gatekeeping had nothing to do with safety or rules or tradition. It was about fear, ego, pride, and the fragile belief that a woman couldn't possibly stand equal to men in the most violent class of motorsport. The worst of it came from officials. They changed licensing procedures. They increased technical inspections. They started requiring additional signatures for each level of approval. They stalled paperwork. They forced her to repeat tests already passed. They even tried to create new regulations around physical requirements, thinly disguised attempts to block her without admitting the true reason. And every time they failed to stop her, they grew more desperate because her fans grew louder, her skill grew sharper, and her presence grew impossible to deny. But the hostility didn't just hit her on the track, it hit her in her personal life. Promoters tried to cut her appearance fees. Sponsors hesitated to support her, worried they'd anger the male drivers who filled most of the field. Some track owners quietly told her team not to return. Even car clubs, once enthusiastic about her early career, backed away, fearful of being judged for supporting a woman trying to race. And through all this, Shirley kept moving forward with the kind of stubborn, fire-hearted determination only people who have nothing left to lose can tap into. What the sport didn't realize, what her critics never understood, was that they were forging something powerful in her. Every insult became fuel. Every protest became a challenge. Every closed door became a reminder that she had already punched through harder barriers. And while they wasted their energy trying to hold her back, she poured hers into one purpose: becoming the most feared, most respected, most unstoppable driver in Top Fuel. The irony was brutal. In trying to keep her out, they made her stronger. In trying to silence her, they amplified her. In trying to embarrass her, they elevated her. And drag racing was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. You can't beat someone who refuses to break. Long before the world knew her as the woman who would one day become the most feared driver on Nitro, Shirley had someone in her corner who understood the storm she was walking into. A man who didn't just believe in her talent, but believed in her fire, her grit, her stubborn refusal to quit, even when the entire sport pushed back. His name was Connie Kalita. And if drag racing had outlaws, renegades, and lone wolves, Kalita was all three rolled into one. A man who built engines like weapons and treated competition like warfare. Someone who didn't care about rules, didn't care about politics, and sure as hell didn't care what anyone thought about him putting a woman in a Top Fuel car. When Shirley was getting buried under protests and insults, Connie didn't offer sympathy, he offered horsepower. While other teams dismissed her as a novelty act, Connie looked at her and saw something racers spend their entire lives chasing: unbreakable focus. He saw how she studied tracks longer than anyone else, how she learned mechanics faster than drivers with a decade more experience, how she attacked every obstacle with a kind of relentless determination he recognized in himself. And more importantly, he knew something the rest of the sport didn't want to admit. She belonged in Top Fuel, and she had the instincts to win. The partnership started quietly, almost in the shadows. Kalita began sharing tuning secrets, the real ones, the ones most crew chiefs kept guarded like treasure. He showed her how nitro engines breathed, how blower overdrive changed personality from run to run, how timing curves shifted as the track cooled, how clutches grabbed differently depending on humidity, how fuel pumps could act like living creatures when pushed near detonation. These weren't things men taught women, not in that era. Not in Top Fuel. Not in a world where racers acted like their knowledge was a birthright. But Connie ignored all of that. Their partnership wasn't soft, wasn't gentle, wasn't sentimental. It was two warriors sharpening each other. Connie yelled at her when she hesitated. Shirley yelled back when he pushed too far. He'd tell her the car was trying to kill her, and she'd respond by strapping in tighter. And the more they clashed, the more obvious it became that she was cut from the same steel he was. She could take pressure that would break most men. She could handle engines few dared to drive. She could run a nitro car with the same cold, surgical precision as the best in the world. Not everyone appreciated this alliance. In fact, most of the Top Fuel field hated it. Drivers whispered that Connie was violating the natural order. Crew chiefs complained that he was giving away information a woman had no business knowing. NHRA officials braced for the backlash they knew was coming. And they were right to be worried, because the combination of Kalita's engineering genius and Shirley's raw talent created something no one could stop. The car got faster, the tune-up got sharper, her reaction times got deadlier. Every run became smoother, cleaner, more controlled, more aggressive. Fans noticed before the officials did. The crowd that once harbored doubts now watched her with a mix of awe and disbelief. They realized the truth before the sport did. She wasn't climbing her way into Top Fuel anymore, she was carving a path straight through it. With Connie at her side, she started doing things that forced everyone, drivers, promoters, officials, to face reality. She beat seasoned racers clean. She made consistent passes in a class where consistency was nearly impossible. And she showed a level of discipline and technical understanding that dismantled every lazy stereotype being thrown at her. And this wasn't just about racing. This was about survival. Because for the first time in her career, Shirley wasn't fighting alone. She had someone who matched her intensity, someone who believed she could do the impossible, someone who stood in front of the men who tried to shut her down and said, "If you've got a problem with her, you've got a problem with me." In a sport built on horsepower, fire, and ego, she suddenly had something far more valuable. A partner who wouldn't let the world break her, a teacher who refused to let her doubt herself, and an ally the old guard feared more than they feared her. Together, they weren't just building a car, they were building a revolution. Shirley Muldowney had survived crashes that should have ended her career, betrayals that would have broken the average racer, and an industry that seemed determined to erase her. But Chapter 7 of her story wasn't about enduring anymore. It was about refusing to bow, about becoming the immovable force the sport had never seen before, and proving that no matter how many men tried to cut her out, she would always carve her way back in, because drag racing wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. And the sport was finally beginning to realize that she was more than a competitor, she was an institution. By the early 1982, Shirley had become a three-time NHRA Top Fuel World Champion, a record so outrageous for a woman in a male-dominated motorsport that reporters didn't know whether to praise her or question the legitimacy of the entire field. But even with the trophy stacking up and the headlines screaming her name, there was one truth she repeated in every interview. This wasn't enough. This wasn't where she stopped. And as long as there was a strip of asphalt left to race on, she would be there. Still, with success came envy. Her victories embarrassed the very men who publicly claimed she didn't belong. And those same men pushed officials, sponsors, and team owners to restore order, to put the sport back in the hands of the boys. Yet every time they tried to corner her out, some new eruption of talent, grit, or sheer insanity from Shirley forced them to reconsider. Her rivalry with some of the biggest names in drag racing had grown into a quiet war, one fought in performance numbers, qualifying margins, and tense, silent stares at the starting line. There were racers who wouldn't pit next to her, who refused to shake her hand after a race, who convinced sponsors not to work with her because a woman winning makes the men look weak, a line Shirley never forgot and used as fuel every time she strapped herself into her car. But while they whispered excuses, She focused on the things she trusted more than politics, more than egos, more than personalities: speed. Shirley's work ethic was so ruthless that crew members joked she didn't sleep, she simply waited for daylight. And even her competition admitted that no one understood the mechanics of a top-fuel dragster the way she did. The defining moment of this era wasn't a victory or a trophy or a record, it was the transformation of her mindset. She was no longer the girl from Schenectady fighting for a chance. She was now a champion who expected the industry to meet her at her level. Interviews from the time show a woman who had grown sharper, more deliberate, more unshakable than ever. She spoke slowly, carefully, with the certainty of someone who no longer needed to prove she belonged, but was instead proving that the sport needed her more than she needed it. She told reporters that winning was the best answer to critics, and she delivered that answer again and again until the crowds stopped questioning her gender and started chanting her name like she was a rock star. Yet behind the scenes, Shirley's personal life was beginning to feel the crushing weight of her achievements. Relationships strained under the pressure of her schedule, sponsors demanded constant results, and the physical toll of driving one of the fastest accelerating machines on Earth was starting to show. But if there was one place where she still felt invincible, it was behind the wheel. In the cockpit, surrounded by the vibration of a nitro-burning engine and the roar of the crowd, she didn't feel tired or overwhelmed or alone. She felt unstoppable. And that was the paradox of Shirley Muldowney. The world kept trying to break her because her existence rewrote the rules. Yet every attempt to break her only forced her to rebuild herself stronger, sharper, more dangerous. At this point in her story, she wasn't just racing men, she was racing history itself, and she was winning. By the summer of 1984, Shirley Muldowney was at the absolute peak of her power. A three-time world champion, a living symbol of dominance, and the one racer nobody wanted to face in a final round because she had entered that rare space in motorsport where talent, instinct, and experience merged into something almost frightening. But the higher she climbed, the more brutal the fall waiting below her became. And Chapter 8 is the moment her entire story nearly ended in a single violent heartbeat. A moment so catastrophic that even the most fearless racers looked at her wreckage and whispered that nobody could survive something like that. The qualifying run at Montreal had begun like any other. The engine snarled to life. The crew gave their final signals, and Shirley eased her top-fuel dragster into position with the calm confidence of someone who had done this thousands of times. The stands were packed, the air shook with nitro fumes, and the crowd watched as the woman who had demolished records, humiliated legends, and reshaped drag racing prepared to launch herself down the track once again. But within seconds of takeoff, everything shattered. Her car veered violently out of control at nearly 250 miles per hour, twisting like a cracked spear, disintegrating as it smashed into the guardrail, flipping, tearing apart, and finally skidding down the strip in a horrifying explosion of metal and fire before the remains came to rest in a mangled heap. Spectators screamed, crew members ran, officials froze. The wreck was so devastating that even seasoned racers, men who had witnessed crashes their entire careers, thought they were staring at a fatality. Shirley had broken nearly every major bone in her legs and feet, crushed parts of her pelvis, shattered her hands, fractured ribs, and suffered internal injuries so severe that surgeons weren't sure she would live through the night, let alone walk again. For hours, doctors operated in a desperate attempt to keep her alive, and for the first time since she stepped into a dragster, Shirley wasn't thinking about winning, beating rivals, or proving herself. She was fighting just to breathe. When the news broke, the drag racing world reacted as if a pillar had fallen. Fans flooded hospitals with letters. Reporters broadcast updates every hour, and even rivals who had once mocked her were forced to confront a painful truth. The sport didn't feel the same without her. Those who had criticized her for years suddenly realized that they needed her, that she had become the beating heart of the spectacle they loved, and that the idea of drag racing without Shirley Muldowney felt hollow. But beneath all the sympathy and shock lay a quieter assumption shared by nearly everyone: the belief that her career was finished. A crash of that magnitude wasn't something you recovered from. Not fully. Not enough to race. Not enough to compete at the highest level. Doctors told her she would need months just to stand again, years to walk without assistance, and possibly the rest of her life to regain full strength. They recommended she retire, accept the legacy she had already built, and step away gracefully. But they didn't know Shirley Muldowney. They didn't understand that the same stubbornness that had carried her through decades of ridicule, sexism, rejection, and sabotage was the same force that now latched onto a single thought: this is not the end. The recovery process was excruciating. She endured more than a dozen surgeries, metal rods hammered into her bones, months in a wheelchair, endless physical therapy, and days when pain drowned out everything else. Yet through all of it, she held on to the image of a dragster. The sound, the speed, the adrenaline, the starting lights, and she promised herself she would return no matter what it cost. In those dark months, something extraordinary happened. The world stopped seeing Shirley as a threat and started seeing her as a survivor. She wasn't the fearsome first lady of drag racing anymore. She was the woman who had stared death in the face and refused to surrender. But what nobody knew, not the doctors, not the reporters, not even the racers who pitied her, was that Shirley wasn't planning a quiet recovery or an emotional farewell tour. She was planning a comeback so impossible, so aggressive, so historic, that it would become one of the greatest returns in motorsport history. And she was already preparing to walk back into the fire. The world expected Shirley Muldowney to fade into retirement, to settle into a legacy already large enough to fill museums and documentaries, to accept that surviving her crash was victory enough. After all, she had nothing left to prove. She had already beaten every man who tried to stop her, rewritten the record books, won 3 world championships, and carved her name into drag racing history with letters so deep they would never be erased. But the people saying she should retire made one critical mistake. They thought Shirley Muldowney lived her life for their approval. They misunderstood that she had never raced to be accepted. She raced because it was the only place she felt alive. So the moment she could sit up in bed again, she started planning the unthinkable: a full return to Top Fuel competition. Her recovery became its own legendary battle. Every morning began with pain so sharp it felt like lightning was being driven through her legs. Dozens of screws and metal rods held her shattered bones together. Physical therapists pushed her to do basic movements most people take for granted: flexing toes, bending knees, trying to put weight on her feet without collapsing. The simple act of standing became a victory. 3 steps became a triumph. 10 steps became a miracle. But Shirley was not interested in walking. She wanted to race. She wanted the fire, the vibration, the roar of a nitro engine shaking through her chest. She wanted to stand on the starting line again and prove that she could defeat something far bigger than any rival she wanted, to defeat fate itself. And so she attacked her recovery with the same ferocity she once used to annihilate opponents. Therapists begged her to slow down, but she refused. Doctors warned her that pushing too hard could undo months of progress, but she didn't care. Pain didn't scare her. Failure didn't scare her. Only quitting scared her. She trained for hours every day, forcing her body to relearn movements that had been destroyed in the crash. She lifted, stretched, strengthened, broke down, cried, screamed, healed, and kept going. Every setback only sharpened her resolve, and slowly, very slowly, her body began to obey her again. She went from a wheelchair to crutches, from crutches to a cane, and from a cane to walking unaided. But returning to drag racing required more than healing. It required rebuilding her entire world. Sponsors doubted she would ever race competitively again. Teams hesitated to invest in someone who had nearly died on the track. Reporters spoke about her in the past tense. Even some friends whispered that she should be grateful she survived at all. But every doubt, every hesitation, every polite, "maybe it's time to rest," only fueled her fire further. She refused to let the world bury her career while she was still breathing. So she made calls. She pitched sponsors. She hunted for funding. She reminded people exactly who she was. And slowly, piece by piece, the impossible began to take shape. A new car, a new team, and a path back to the starting line. When she finally returned to the drag strip after years of rehab, the reaction was electric. Fans who had followed her entire journey erupted in cheers when they saw her walking toward her dragster again. Old rivals watched in disbelief. Crew members froze, unable to process that the woman they once assumed might never walk again was now suiting up to race. There was no fear on her face, no hesitation in her movements, only determination. The helmet went on, the belts clicked, the engine roared to life, and the entire drag racing community held its breath. Her first run back wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was that she crossed the finish line under her own power. She had done it. She had returned to the place where she nearly died and reclaimed it with the strength of someone who refused to be defined by tragedy. Every race she entered afterward became a celebration of resilience. Every pass down the track, a reminder that she was still a force capable of rewriting expectations. By returning, Shirley Muldowney did something no trophy could fully capture. She proved that greatness isn't measured only by victories or championships, it's measured by the courage to rise after everything has been taken from you. Her comeback wasn't just a chapter in motorsport history, it was a message carved into steel and pavement. You cannot stop a woman who refuses to stop herself. Shirley Muldowney didn't just return to drag racing, she reclaimed it, reshaped it, and forced the entire motorsport world to acknowledge a truth they had spent decades avoiding. The greatest racer alive didn't have to be a man. By the time she rolled into the final era of her career, she had become more than a champion. She was a symbol, a movement, a living reminder that grit, fury, and brilliance don't come with a gender attached. She had fought through sexism, sabotage, gatekeeping, rivalries, politics, and a crash that should have ended everything. She had outlasted most of the men who swore she would never belong. And yet, there she was, helmet on, fire in her eyes, and victory in her blood. Every track she visited treated her arrival like an event. Fans, young and old, crowded the fences just to catch a glimpse of her. Mothers lifted daughters onto their shoulders and pointed at Shirley like she was a superhero brought to life. Fathers told their sons, "Watch her. That right there is what toughness looks like." Journalists who once mocked her now chased her down for quotes. Drivers who once dismissed her now spoke about her with awe. Even the legends she competed against, Garlitz, Prudhomme, McEwen, admitted publicly that she had changed the sport forever. And Shirley didn't slow down. Even as the years stacked up and she became one of the oldest active drivers in Top Fuel, her competitive fire refused to dim. She continued making passes so clean and aggressive that younger racers began studying her footage frame by frame, trying to understand how she maintained such precision under such pressure. Her reactions on the tree were still razor sharp. Her instincts were still surgical. Her courage was still ironclad. But her true legacy wasn't measured in ET numbers or Wally trophies. It was measured in the thousands of women she inspired to chase dreams that seemed impossible. Before Shirley, female racers were treated like sideshow attractions. After Shirley, they became contenders, champions, leaders. She didn't just open a door, she ripped it off the hinges and burned it for fuel. Women erupted into drag racing at every level, from junior dragster to pro stock to Top Fuel itself. Girls who grew up watching her became racers, mechanics, engineers, and crew chiefs. Her influence reached far beyond drag strips. She inspired athletes, entrepreneurs, service members, and anyone told they weren't allowed to chase something great. She taught them a lesson she had spent her entire life proving. No one gets to decide your limits except you. When Shirley eventually stepped out of the driver's seat for the final time, she didn't exit quietly. Crowds lined up for hours just to thank her. Drivers embraced her with the respect once denied to her. Track officials, announcers, legends, rookies, everyone stopped to acknowledge the end of an era. And as she stood there on the asphalt, the same ground she once bled on, she realized something profound. Her career had never been about proving the doubters wrong. It had been about proving herself right. Today, her cars sit in museums. Her name sits in every serious conversation about the greatest racers of all time. Her story is taught, studied, respected, and celebrated. She remains one of the fiercest icons motorsport has ever produced. And long after engines fall silent, long after the last nitro flame fades, Shirley Muldowney's legacy will continue roaring like a top-fueled dragster at full throttle, unstoppable, undeniable, unforgettable. Because in the end, she didn't just shock drag racing, she transformed it. She conquered it. She became its heart. Shirley Muldowney wasn't supposed to make history. She wasn't supposed to outrun the greatest drivers in America. She wasn't supposed to survive a crash that nearly took her life. She wasn't supposed to come back stronger than before. But that's the thing about legends. They don't follow the rules. They break them. And in doing so, they change the world. So when you hear the roar of a nitro engine, when you see a woman fire down the drag strip at 300 miles per hour, when you watch a racer refuse to quit no matter what stands in their way, remember this. Shirley Muldowney did it first. She did it hardest. And she did it in a sport that tried everything to stop her. Some heroes are born, but the greatest ones, they're forged in fire.